Onesimo Gonzalez sits in an outdoor kitchen, singing traditional songs and reminiscing. He looks out onto a dusty landscape of sand, rock, and shrubs, but his steady eyes also gaze inward to a time more than half a century ago.
It was very beautiful this time of the year. The plants would all be blooming. Everything smelled wonderful. We had lots of water. Everywhere there was a lot to eat.
The 70-year-old Gonzalez is tribal chief of the native Cucapá people in northern Baja. He says before the United States dammed the Colorado River, there were lush woodlands here, many deer, as well as vast wetlands filled with fish and birds.
Now everything is dry. The ironwood is the only thing alive. That old desert tree and us are the only things that survive here.
Gonzalez says he just can't understand it. How could the United States take almost all of the water from the Colorado River without considering how it would ruin the Delta and the Cucapá people? Fishing used to be at the center of Cucapá life, but all of the fish native to the river have died out, and many of the fisheries in the upper Gulf of California are in steep decline. Overfishing is partly to blame, but the Mexican government also thinks lack of fresh water is a big part of the problem. To save the fish, the government has banned much of the fishing around the Delta. Gonzalez says Mexican fishermen are so poor they often ignore the prohibition.
The government saying no more fishing is like someone cutting off our heads.
But as big as the U.S. dams are, they can't always hold back the full U.S. share of the river, 90%. In recent years, after big rainfalls, the reservoirs filled up, and the United States had to let excess water flow downriver to Mexico. This overflow and other flukes have led to a small revival of nature in pockets of the Delta. About 30 miles southeast of Gonzalez's village, biologist Osbel Hinojosa navigates a canoe through a large marsh filled with blonde cattails. Yellow-headed blackbirds are perched atop the tall plants. Marsh wrens collect strands for their nests. But this afternoon, Hinojosa is searching for birds that are seldom seen, because they live hidden in dense thickets of vegetation and because they are rare. To locate the birds, called Yuma clapper rails, Hinojosa plays recordings.
They respond to the tape. It's their territorial vocalization, or they're looking for a mate. So they either respond because they don't want other competing individual in their territory, or because they think it may be a potential mate. So they respond to that.
The shy birds are slim. They're literally thin as a rail. Their compressed bodies allow them to squeeze through thickets of plants without creating a stir. They're endangered in both the U.S. and Mexico. Only about 600 Yuma clapper rails remain in the U.S., but between 4,000 and 6,000 live in this marsh called the Ciénaga de Santa Clara. Hinojosa turns into a canal that cuts through a large swath of cattails swaying in the breeze. That's when we hear the unusual cluck that gives clapper rails their name. The abundance of Yuma clapper rails here tells Hinojosa that the Ciénaga is an exemplary restoration, even though it happened by accident. The marsh was created when farmers in Arizona began dumping water too salty for agriculture into the Sonoran Desert. Hinojosa says the Ciénaga is proof that restoring more water to the Delta would help preserve many species that live on both sides of the border.
Very little water will make a huge difference. Probably even just 1% of the river water will make a huge difference, for not just for the Ciénaga, but for the whole Delta.
American environmental groups and the Mexican government hope the United States will let more water flow into Mexico. For one thing, the Washington, D.C.-based Defenders of Wildlife believes that because a significant number of Delta species are also endangered in the United States, the U.S. has an obligation to help protect them in Mexico. But so far, their case has been rejected by U.S. courts. Mexico's Secretary for the Environment, Victor Lichtinger, says his country would be willing to guarantee that additional water would go to the environment.
We need that water for conserving the delta and also for making sure that that water, the water of the Colorado River, finishes in the Gulf. And we have been trying to talk to the United States about it for a long time without any response. We are very worried about it.
But the U.S. government says the issue was settled in 1944 when a treaty between the two countries divvied up the river and gave Mexico 10%. Bennett Raley, the Interior Department's top water official, says additional water for the Delta should come from Mexico's share.
Further constraining reality or defining reality is that the United States share of the water of the Colorado River is completely allocated, and those that suggest that, it's just 1%. Well, what they're really talking about is taking away significant quantities of water from either Arizona, Southern California, or Nevada.
4 years of drought along the river have left U.S. water agencies scrambling after every drop. So it's not only unlikely the Delta will get more water, it's likely it will get less. Arizona is looking to desalinate the salty wastewater that now sustains the Cienega. And Osbel Hinojosa says the U.S. has drained its reservoirs so low, it could be years before the Delta gets any spillover again.
For the next year, the next few years, we expect probably just a dry riverbed here. So all that has been restored probably might be lost again if we don't do something about that.
As the sun begins to set, Hinojosa paddles toward the center of the marsh. His steel boat slides over gentle currents that murmur through the silvery pink.